What's more terrifying than death? Selling it in a bottle. In this episode, I'm joined by Viggy Parr Hampton, author of the chilling novel, The Rotting Room. We dive into the grotesque and the sacred, where decaying nuns are part of a divine ritual. We talk about the real historical death rites that inspired the story, how Viggy's background as an epidemiologist brings scientific weight to her body horror, and how silence, shame, and denial shape her unforgettable characters. So without further ado, I give you Viggy Parr Hampton. Viggy, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining me on this 12th day of May 2025. I came across your work on Bookstagram and was drawn in not only by your prose, but also by your professional background as an epidemiologist and your contributions to Dread Pop magazine. I recently read The Rotting Room and was really impressed with the way it brilliantly explores the terrifying premise of a false prophet infiltrating a religious institution by subtly infusing occult elements into their practices, thereby creating fertile ground for a group of believers to be overtaken by darkness. I really appreciated the clever premise, the tight structure, and the slow burn tension that constantly had the reader questioning not only Sister Raphaela's sanity, but also their own. So thank you for being on the show today to discuss this amazing work.
Thank you so much for inviting me. And that was a wonderful description. So I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. So let's jump right into it. The book follows Sister Raphaela, a young woman transferred to the cloistered Sisters of Divine Innocence after suffering a traumatic experience at her former abbey, the Raphaelites. The Sisters of Divine Innocence are deeply devout and highly structured, but with one disturbing practice. When a sister dies, her body is placed in a stone chair in the, quote, chamber of divine decomposition, where the others pray as the body decays, believing this aids the soul's passage into heaven. Even more unsettling, buckets are placed beneath the bodies to collect the fluids released during decomposition. And things take a darker turn when Raphaela discovers the convent sells a bottled, quote, healing essence to the townspeople, an essence, she suspects, that is made from those very fluids. And that's where the real horror begins. So, in the author's note, you mentioned that the story was inspired by a real 17th century practice in which the, and I'm probably going to butcher this, Poor Clares of Ischia, Italy?
You got it.
Ah, all right. Place their dead in an underground room lined with stone chairs, allowing the bodies to slowly mummify. The living sisters who prayed near the corpses often fell victim to the same diseases that claimed the deceased. So, as an epidemiologist, how did your scientific background inform how you wrote about the spread of disease and the psychology of isolation in the convent?
Sure. Well, obviously, I love learning about diseases. And when I came across that historical context, the first thing that caught my eye, besides just the architecture of this room and its purpose, was that they had no idea about how diseases spread. So when they would put a dead body in there and then maintain close contact with her, they would die themselves. That just absolutely blew my mind. So with the interest in diseases comes an interest in the body from kind of a scientific point of view. I mean, your body is the ultimate barrier against everything. It is, it's your whole self. When you're infected with something and something invades that barrier, I find that horrifying. And kind of from that naturally stems the body horror, the infection gone wrong, and kind of the idea of an outbreak in any context is kind of a plot point I gravitate towards because that's what scares me.
Yeah. Well, so let's see, 17th century. So when was the germ theory? Was it Louis Pasteur?
Pasteur, yeah.
Yeah. When was that? Do you remember?
I want to say it was in the 1800s.
In the 1800s.
And
so
people didn't necessarily
it.
believe it. Yeah, for a long time, people didn't necessarily buy into that either. And especially when you're in an isolated convent, that's not really the forefront of, scientific exploration.
Yeah. There's a lot of people back there going, fake news. Unfortunate for them, and I'm sorry to keep prodding you on this. I'm curious, like, what was it like? Consumption, which we now call tuberculosis.
Yeah, I mean that was running rampant for sure, and cholera and a bunch of other plague. I mean that was earlier, but a bunch of these nasty diseases were running around, and people thought they were caused by miasmas or bad air, and people just didn't really understand germ theory until much, much later.
Yeah. Well, so the first scene of the book plunges the reader along with Sister Raphaella into the chamber of divine decomposition. You don't have to wait for it at all. Were there earlier drafts where the story began elsewhere, or was this always your intended entry point?
When I first started writing, I had Raphaella coming to the convent, traveling up the path to the hill, seeing this convent and kind of her thought process about going from where she was to where she's about to be. And my editor was very big on, the impact of the first chapter, the first paragraph, the first line. And I rewrote that chapter several times before I realized I want something that starts out with a bang. I want people to be, kind of punched in the gut with the horror in the very beginning. Because, with a title like The Rotting Room, you don't want people to, be there hanging, wondering, what is that? Right off the bat. Because I know I am guilty of this. If I am not hooked, immediately, it's hard for me to want to keep reading because there are so many books out there that I want to read. So I wanted to make this one where you are absolutely compelled to keep going.
Yeah. Along with a compelling cover. So from a craft perspective, how did you balance exposition with forward momentum in such a surreal and intense setting? As you say, you want to punch them in the gut, but you also want to give background, but keep it flowing.
It's always a challenge. I think you just have to keep the pacing as tight as you can and only give the reader as much information as they need. I think I read this advice once that you as the author, it's great that you know the entire backstory and every little thing about your character. The reader doesn't need to know it unless it is germane to the plot or helps explain the character development. So, it's definitely a balancing act, hence the multiple rewrites of that first chapter. And it's something that I'm still working on. I think anybody who says they can do it perfectly right off the bat is lying. I think everybody needs an editor, and that's where that editor comes in to help you find that balance so that people don't get bored.
Yeah. Yeah, editing is such an interesting skill set. I guess that would be a more analytical mind, but even analytical, there's still not all editors. Some almost do nothing but copy, but like the ones that really tell you the story should go in this direction or have a lot more creative input. What do you think gives people that talent? What kind of mind are you working with where it's both creative and extremely analytical at the same time?
I think it has to be somebody who can blend the art and the science, and it has to be somebody who has read a ton of books, because you will find people who say, here is the structure of a good story, kind of the saves the cat type narrative. And then you just have people who read something like a ton of horror and can give you more about pacing, or you need somebody who's super honest and will tell you this is not working. Because, you have plenty of people who will say this book is great and never tell you the truth. But my mom, for example, is my beta reader, and she will tell me right off the bat, this doesn't work. But it always helps when somebody tells you what's not working, but doesn't necessarily tell you how to fix it, because that's your job as the writer. But knowing that something is wrong gives you that push to make it better.
Yeah. Are there any particular darlings that you have to kill? Like recurring darlings, like, oh, there he or she is again.
I haven't noticed that recently, but I will say, I know we're going to get to this later, but when I do my Dread Pop Tag Team Tales of Terror, one thing that I keep finding myself saying as I'm doing these impromptu stories is, and then I realized, And I have to cut that out every time because it's one of those kind of narrative things you rely on that you don't realize until you have to hear yourself say it over and over. So I'm sure I have little darlings I have to kill all the time.
So when you realized that in your head, did you say, and then I realized?
I sure did. And then I realized I should stop saying, and then I realized.
Very meta. Well, circling back to the book, everyone in the Abbey had taken a vow of silence, which was lifted for 1 hour each day during recreation, as well as during confession. Could you talk a bit about how you used silence as a narrative device to heighten tension and support the story's atmosphere?
Sure. So I really wanted to challenge myself as a writer, and severely limiting the dialogue was definitely a challenge. But I wanted to make the narrative very claustrophobic. I mean, we're already isolated physically in this abbey that's far away from everything else. But when you can't escape your own mind, or in this case, Raphaela's mind, and you have the tension also of never knowing quite what is true, I think that really added to kind of the isolated, the despairing mood. And it really makes the reader feel like there is no escape, which is what I want. I want to trap you in my book so you finish the whole thing.
Gotcha. Well, you mentioned it just a few seconds ago as far as writing scenes with minimal dialogue. What kind of creative challenges in particular did that produce, and how did you overcome them?
Definitely balancing the action with the interior thoughts. I didn't want things to get repetitive and boring, so I had to find kind of creative ways to move the plot forward without dialogue. And that really required me to develop Raphael as a character and not as a caricature, because I think when people can understand her and empathize with her, it's so much easier for them to get invested in the story. So this is where I had to dig really deep on character development to keep the story from getting boring.
Gotcha. Well, throughout her childhood, her time at the previous abbey, and her current station, Sister Raphaela struggles deeply with denial. And it occurred to me, the Raphaelites, Raphaela was her name, like the way the Pope takes a different name when he's instituted. Did she take on the name Raphaela based on that order, or?
Yeah, she was named Raphaela for Saint Raphaela, as were the Raphaelites. So her father thought that would be a good place for her.
Gotcha. So throughout her childhood, her time at the previous abbey, and her current station, Sister Raphaela struggles deeply with denial. What made you choose denial as such a central thread in her character arc?
Because I think it's something we can all relate to. I mean, even if you're naturally pessimistic, nobody wants to believe the absolute worst all the time. So you deny things you don't want to deal with. And I think the scariest part of that is trying to discover if the denial is warranted or not.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny how denial, a lot of times it's unconscious, but it's literally like it's not, like, I don't know how to describe it. It's like you've stepped outside of yourself and you're witnessing yourself do something based on the fact that you're denying a fact that's directly in front of you. You just can't make the mental connection of, hey, stop doing that. You know, especially denial, at least for me, especially comes into play in situations that are exemplary of the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. I'm always in denial about that. Like, no, why would I do things differently? This is the way I'm comfortable with, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Or you don't want to have to rethink your entire belief system. So if something challenges that, it's way easier to say that's not a thing versus rethinking everything you've devoted your entire life to.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, how much of Raphaela's denial do you see as rooted in religious conditioning versus personal trauma?
I would say it's a mix. I mean, she has a lot of childhood trauma, but that's kind of wrapped up within her religious trauma. They kind of go hand in hand. I mean, her whole life, she's been told she cannot believe the evidence of her own senses. Everybody tells her she's unreliable, even to herself. And so she's kind of internalized that. And so she thinks anything that I think is probably wrong. So I'm going to place my trust in other people who know better. And as we know, that gets her in some pretty bad situations.
Definitely. Well, in writing her inner conflict, did you ever struggle with how much self-awareness to give her at different points in the narrative?
Sure. I mean, I wanted her to have enough self-awareness to keep the reader interested. I think it would get kind of boring if she just kept going blindly in the wrong direction and you're as the reader sitting there going, no, don't do that. So giving her some self-awareness, I think it made it easier for the reader to kind of see themselves in her, to root for her, and to empathize with her a little bit.
Gotcha. Well, the other main character in the story is Father Bruno, the priest tasked with receiving confessions and performing Mass. Father Bruno carries a traumatic past himself in which he feels he failed to protect a woman who did her best to protect him. Ultimately, her harm came as a result of the delusions fostered by fundamentalist religious beliefs. So the woman from his past stands in stark contrast to the rigid world of the church. Was she meant to represent an alternate path, perhaps one rooted in compassion over doctrine?
I think that's a fair reading of it. When I was writing it, I was thinking more about the dangerous power of superstition over, again, the evidence of your own senses. You can look at somebody and you can say, this is a good person. I trust because they've done good things for me that I don't have to worry about them. But in a way, Father Bruno's kind of his trauma mirrors Raphaela's. I mean, again, he's being told not to trust what he knows, that other people know better, that the set of beliefs that they're all following blindly, that's the way to go, even though he knows it's not the right way. So I think having a similar trauma to Raphaela helps them connect in a way that if he had always had a good life, he might not, believe her. He might not be interested in her. He might just write her off as crazy, which I think would make the narrative a lot less interesting.
Yeah, and I have to admit, I basically did the same thing the villagers did with regard to the old woman, because have you ever seen that movie, The Witch?
Oh, yeah.
So in my mind, I'm going to try and explain this without giving away any spoilers, but in my mind, at some point, that woman was going to turn into a young woman and do something indecent with him as a boy. That's what was in my head. And and I was surprised at wow, no, I'm kind of a shithead for thinking that. I'm just as bad as the villagers. So, well, in terms of narrative structure, why was it important to give Bruno his own emotional arc rather than just making him a supporting figure? And I know you just explained giving him a similar traumatic background, but as far as that being even necessary to begin with, him being a supporting figure.
Well, since we get his point of view, I wanted him to be a full and developed character. I mean, he is a flawed human being with a past. And I think if I had kind of glossed over that, it would be strange to be in his POV and not experience him as a full character. I think it would make those sections of his pale in comparison to Raphaela's and make the narrative feel really unbalanced.
Gotcha. And this may be a personal question, but are you religious at all?
I went to a Catholic college, but I was raised Presbyterian, but I don't currently go to church or anything like that. So this was out of my wheelhouse.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just always curious because I know priests, they take a vow of celibacy, right?
Catholic priests, yes.
Catholic priests, yeah. And then don't they live actually in some sort of a accommodation that's connected to the church that they serve in?
Mm-hmm. And yeah. Father Bruno does. He lives in a parish in the church in the village.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I've always wondered what that, I mean, if you're a very spiritual person and very dedicated to a religion, it sounds like the perfect match, but just the complete lack of a personal life in service to others to the point where you're not even leaving work. I mean, you live at work, basically, for lack of a better term. I wonder if anybody's ever studied, even though that it's spiritually fulfilling for them, I'm sure, can it have some sort of detrimental effect to their psychology?
That's a really interesting question. I would love to see a study about that because you're right. I mean, you're devoting your entire life. You have made one thing your social, your emotional, your physical, your financial support. And that could either be great or it could be terrible.
Yeah, it would seem like, I don't know, it just seems like all humans have needs. And I'm not talking about the celibacy necessarily, just, the ability to separate yourself from work, or, I mean, do they take vacations? Are they on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year? I've always been curious about that.
In a historical context, my guess would be you are on call 365 days a year. Hopefully now I think it's more moderated.
Yeah. Well, Father Bruno's character becomes further complicated when he first lays eyes on Sister Raffaella, who appears to be not only the youngest woman in the abbey, but also an attractive one. He feels a carnal stirring both when receiving her confession and again when administering communion. Father Bruno seems both ashamed and aware of his desires. How much of that shame do you think is internal and how much is institutional?
I would say most is probably institutional, if you mean kind of like planted by the tenets of his religious belief system. But I believe also in that time, interactions like that before marriage would also be, frowned upon. So it's probably a little bit of both, but especially he's a priest. He has promised, he's taken this vow of celibacy. So he feels doubly, triply, quadruply shameful because of that.
Just out of curiosity, Sister Raffaella, what age did you put her at?
I'd say she's in her early 20s.
Early 20s? Okay. Well, there is an uncomfortable truth in this moment that holiness and desire can become entangled. Was that duality central to your depiction of Father Bruno?
I don't know if it was kind of central or a main theme for his character, but just kind of another realistic side of his humanity. I mean, as I said, he's a full character. He's got emotions, he's got urges, he's got unclean thoughts, just like we all have. And I think to deny him that would make him seem more cardboard than fully realized. And I mean, as with Raffaella, he struggles with this divide between what he knows in his heart to be right and what his religion and training are telling him is right. So I think that's definitely an important part of his character, but I don't know if it's the main part.
Yeah, I wonder, again, I guess it's all completely subjective. Like, I don't even know how you would do a study on it, but I often wonder, like, you're supposed to be above reproach. What does go on in the mind of a man of God?
Do we even want to know?
I don't know. Yeah. Some of them definitely not.
Mm-hmm.
Well, now we encounter a very strange character indeed. Sister Berta, or at least we think she's a sister, as no clear connection can be made to where she came from. She appears unannounced at the abbey's doorstep, claiming to have come from an abbey in England, which she fled due to the fact that they were expelling religious orders. She's described as having a subtle arrogance to her personality, regardless of whom she's talking to. What were you intending to foreshadow with that element of her character? That's the one glaring thing I remember is you describing her as having this upturned smile and kind of beady-eyed flaring of the nostrils or something like that whenever she was talking to somebody as if she was sneering at them.
I wanted you as a reader to instantly know, something's off here. And as a reader, you're taking in this sensory information too, and you're thinking, okay, you guys, you need to turn her away. Something is wrong with her. And she's an outsider, but because of the kind of social norms and the tenets of their religion, the sisters invite her in and they take what she says at face value. And so now I've created this divide for the reader where they're thinking, okay, you did something wrong here. And yet you have somebody else saying, no, we're doing this right. So I'm kind of putting you in Sister Raffaella's position and you're trying to think, oh, is she bad or not? I don't know.
Yeah. And what were the other things? The arrogance? What were the other real subtle cues that she was giving off?
She smirks a lot.
Smirks. She was extremely sick, though, wasn't she? She was coughing up blood.
She was coughing pretty bad, which, as an epidemiologist, I'm like, okay, maybe we don't get really close to her. But, they're religious. They're like, let's bring in the sick person who says they're a sister.
Yeah. Well, Sister Berta is extremely tired and extremely ill when she arrives. So Sister Raffaella is tasked with taking her to a room and ensuring she gets the provisions that she needs. However, Sister Berta quickly dies. Her body is then placed in the chamber of divine decomposition, but after several days, the sisters are shocked to discover that her corpse has not begun to decay. And that, dear reader, is where you will have to pick up the story by buying, reading, and reviewing the book. No spoilers.
No spoilers.
But it was a great book. Definitely, listeners at home, buy it, read it, and review it. But I wanted to ask you about your previous novels. Let's start with Much Too Vulgar.
Sure. So Much Too Vulgar is very different from The Rotting Room. It's contemporary, first off. It is not supernatural. It's more of a psychological horror about this disturbed pre-med student named Keely, who will do literally anything she can to get into med school, even if that means eliminating her competition.
Oh, like competition for a scholarship or something?
Yes, or in this case, it's a research program she's trying to get into,
Uh-huh.
and yeah, she's very unhinged, lots of female rage, just kind of a nasty person.
Okay. You didn't off anybody to get into medical school, did you?
I certainly didn't. I have had people ask me if this is autobiographical. I promise it is not.
Well, how about A Cold Night for Alligators?
Sure. So this one again,
catchy name, by the way.
Thank you. This one is again kind of a different type of horror. This is the first book I ever wrote, and it's more supernatural. It's about a rogue epidemiologist, pulled from my own life here a little bit, who chases this mysterious outbreak to an abandoned theme park that might be haunted. So I pulled a lot more from my own experiences in my own life to write this one. Well, I did with Much Too Vulgar as well, but this was fun for me because it's all about diseases, and we've got an epidemiologist main character.
And I guess, forgive me for backtracking a little bit, but as far as with Much Too Vulgar, you used a word that hit my sweet spot as far as what I love in literature, which is psychological horror. Psychological in the sense that she's having like a psychotic impulse, or what's going on?
Yes. I'll just say yes.
Okay.
Also, since there are no supernatural elements, this is something that could really happen. And she is a bit of an unreliable narrator as well. So you're in your own head thinking what's real, what's not. Can I trust what she's saying?
Gotcha. Well, your characters often have very distinct internal voices. How do you craft those voices, especially when working with multiple point of views like Rafaela and Bruno?
Sure. We talked about this a little bit earlier, but I would say it really helps to build a character profile for each of your characters. And even if you don't include all the details in the final manuscript, kind of knowing these things about your characters that the reader doesn't know helps you make them full people, helps you understand what their actions would be so that you can have them do things that are believable. And you don't want them to be cardboard cutouts. That's not interesting. And you also want to be able to keep the voices separate. And I think if you don't know who your characters are as individuals, they all end up sounding like the same person, which makes the reading experience really difficult.
So you having a complete profile of a character, even though 70% of that is not known to the reader, you knowing it helps you flesh them out a lot better.
100%. Yeah. Even if
Gotcha.
it's like, what's her home life like? How did she grow up? What's her grandparent like? Things like that. What's her favorite food? Stuff like that. So that when I'm thinking of writing her, I can put in those little details that make her or him seem like a real person.
Gotcha. Well, you just mentioned detailed character profiles, but as far as the story itself, meticulous outliner or discover the story as you go?
I have been both a plotter and a pantser. With my first book, A Cold Night for Alligators, completely pantsed. And by that, I mean you just fly by the seat of your pants, no outline. I would maybe take some notes at the end of a writing session for where I wanted it to go after that. But I will say that did require a lot of editing because of that. I have had Much Too Vulgar and The Rotting Room were partially plotted, and that helped with going back and editing. But I'm still kind of evolving my process. Since both of these books, I've written two others that I think I plotted way too much, and I'm kind of reeling it back and going with a loose outline structure with lots of room for surprises, because I think that's more fun as a writer and as a reader.
Gotcha. So is there something about each story that kind of necessitates one method or the other? Or, as you said, you're still just kind of trying to feel out your technique?
I think I'm still feeling out my technique. I've just found that the ones that I've written where I plotted out everything through the end were not as much fun to write. And if it might sound cliche, but if my characters wanted to do something else, I had to keep fitting them into this plot because, I'd plotted it. That's where the narrative needed to go. And it resulted in some weird motivations, things characters might not do. And it didn't have, I call it the sparkle. It made the stories just less sparkly, less interesting. And so I'm trying with the book I'm writing right now. I'm about 22,000 words into it. I have no outline, but I have a rough collection of notes and a general direction where I'm heading. Way more fun to write. And I think it has that sparkle. Fingers crossed.
So kind of a scaffolding that you can pants within.
That is a very good way of characterizing it. Yeah.
I forget who it was that told me, they were like, if you try to make a character do something that they don't want to do, it's not going to go well. So
that is so true. And I know people are like, but you're the writer, you made up this person. But people can tell if you're forcing a character to do something that doesn't make sense. It's very obvious.
Yeah. Facts like those make me put a lot of stock into like Jungian psychology with like the archetypes and the stuff that's all in our collective unconscious. Like, maybe we didn't create them. Maybe they're all right there connected to us universally. And if we abuse them in some way, it's just not going to be a good story. We need to respect, I guess, the archetypes.
I mean, it makes sense. I've experienced it.
Yeah. Well, how much of your, and this is kind of piggybacking off what we've been talking about, how much of your writing relies on instinct versus consciously planning out symbolism, theme, and structure?
I would say I don't really plan out symbolism, theme. When I get an idea for a book, I would say the first thing that comes is kind of the theme and the general direction, like the general shape. I'll say the shape of the story. Everything beyond that is instinct. And if I don't follow my instinct, like I said, the story kind of loses its sparkle. So I leave room for that instinct, like you said, the scaffolding to pants within so that my characters can surprise me and keep the story from falling flat.
And I don't know how dark, how violent your previous books got, but writing horror in general, but especially if it's really dark, really violent, really, kind of has that soul-crushing grief in the narrative, can be emotionally taxing for some authors. Are you one of those authors? And if so, how do you manage the mental weight of exploring fear, trauma, or dread over extended periods?
It's a great question. And I would say I actually find it cathartic to be a horror author. I think in general, in real life, I'm a nice person, but writing horror helps me kind of channel all of my nasty thoughts, all of my mean urges that everybody has into this productive outcome that everybody can enjoy. So for me, writing horror is more like therapy, not the thing that requires me to get therapy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the horror authors that tell me that it's cathartic, they're trying to purge, the dark stuff out of them. It's kind of like, I'm beating my Jungian drum, but, integrating with the shadow self, the dark mind, the shadow self. And then there are they're usually splatterpunk authors that will tell me like, yeah, after a little while, I do need a bit of an emotional palate cleanser. Like I think Judith Sonnet watches The Munsters. And actually, Eric LaRocca told me that he doesn't really, like outside of his reading and writing, everything that he watches as far as movies and television is very on the light side. Like he doesn't watch horror movies. He doesn't watch TV series with real dark subject matter. Everything else in his life is pretty fluffy.
I can get behind that. I mean, when I watch TV, it's usually light stuff. I like reality TV. I'm not even ashamed to admit it. I love horror movies too, but I just don't necessarily always gravitate towards them because I'm always reading horror books and I'm always writing horror books. So I can totally understand that.
Yeah, my wife loves watching 90 Day Fiancé. Is it 90 days?
Yeah. 90 Day Fiancé, you got it.
Yeah. And the first season, who was the real short guy that put mayonnaise in his hair?
Oh, gosh. I know who you're talking about.
You know who I'm talking about.
Yep.
I got, for Christmas one year, I got her a video from that guy off of Cameo. He was skating around on a scooter, dressed with a Santa hat on, got up in the camera and wished her Merry Christmas.
Fantastic gift.
It's pretty funny. Anyway, I digress. Well, let's see. You are, as we've spoken about many times so far, an epidemiologist. Can you tell us a little bit about your occupation?
Sure. So, in case people don't know, an epidemiologist is somebody who studies kind of the pattern of disease outbreaks. And I got my MPH, my Master of Public Health, from Emory. And while I was there, I worked as a student researcher at the CDC on the National Guidelines for the Clinical Management of Botulism, and which was very fun. But basically, that kind of is a plan for what we do in the event of a bioterror attack or a large-scale outbreak involving botulinum toxin, which is incredibly dangerous and can be deadly in even extremely small doses. And it will paralyze your nervous system and you kind of die by suffocation.
Isn't that what people put in their faces?
Yes, it is. It works by paralyzing the muscles, but that is not the kind of botulism that you have to be worried about. Be more worried about dented cans. That's the danger there. When you have dented cans and air gets in, that can be dangerous for a botulism risk.
Oh, okay.
But it is rare. When I was there were 99 cases a year, maybe. So it is considered a rare disease, but it's one of the nasty ones. So I assisted in the research for the creation of those guidelines, and I really enjoyed it. And then after that, I worked in healthcare strategy and consulting, and I still do that to this day.
Awesome. What does that look like as far as who would hire you for consulting? What type of businesses or?
Mm-hmm. Healthcare systems, healthcare startups, anything in the health space. So I've worked with tiny companies and I've worked with national and international companies.
Gotcha. All right. Well, epidemiology and fiction writing may seem like opposites, one analytical, one imaginative, but have you found any surprising overlaps between the two?
100%. I mean, I think
like a Venn diagram.
Actually, yes. I think you cannot be a good scientist if you're not a good writer. So a lot of my training focused on being able to take what you've discovered, what you've researched, and translate it so anybody can understand it. Because otherwise you'll make these great discoveries or have these insights and nobody will know what you're talking about and you're not going to make any impact whatsoever. So learning how to kind of distill complex topics into easy to understand language, things that are straightforward, really improved my ability to write, period, but also really improved my ability to write fiction with nuance. So I actually don't think they're opposite at all. I think it has only helped me learn how to be specific, how to really paint a picture, and how to be very clear.
Gotcha. Well, let me bring this up here. Speaking of being on a podcast, you yourself have a podcast.
I sure do.
Called the Horror Humor Hunger Podcast. This is the podcast on Apple Podcasts, but I believe you're on Spotify.
Pretty
Amazon,
much everywhere.
Pretty much everywhere? Yeah. Can you tell us about the subject matter and kind of a general overview?
Sure. So Horror Humor Hunger is about all things horror. And in general, my seasons are inspired by either a short story or a novel that I've written. And throughout the season, I will invite people on to guest, and we talk about themes from the book usually. So, right now my season is all about religious horror because of The Rotting Room. And I have screenwriters. I've had exorcists in the past. I have fellow authors who write religious and dark horror. And it's been really awesome. And then at the end of every season, I have a recipe inspired by whatever short story or novel, because that is another passion of mine. I love to cook and I love to bake. So that's where the hunger part comes in. And when I first started this podcast, to be super candid, I wanted to build an audience. I mean, I'm a self-published author, and one of the most difficult things to do in general is just to market yourself, because you don't want to bother people, or, you keep saying, here's this book I wrote, I promise you it's good. So podcasting became a way for me to build that audience and get my name out there. And then I came to realize that it is super fun and I love doing it, because I'm sure you can understand this, how you get to talk to interesting people about why they're interesting. Mm-hmm. It's not small talk. It's just, let's get to the really deep, interesting questions right away. And I've really loved doing that. And I'm so happy that I found it, honestly. And as for why it's called Horror Humor Hunger, that's sort of my brand. I write horror. Most of it has a twist of dark humor. Rotting Room, not so much, unless you have a very dark sense of humor, which I do. And then the hunger, I think hunger is deeply rooted in horror just as a concept. And then, as I said, we have those recipes at the end. So we have kind of metaphorical and literal hunger covered.
Gotcha. Well, you have another kind of multimedia project that you're involved with. Tell us about the tag team, this is like alliterative as hell, the tag team Tales of Terror segment on Dread Pop Magazine's YouTube channel.
Yes, I love alliterations, as you can see. So Dread Pop Magazine is the brainchild of Gage Greenwood. He's another fabulous indie author. And I was super excited when I was invited to be part of the founding membership. And just to give a little plug for Dread Pop, it's if you're on our Patreon, you can get a new short story by a master of horror every week, delivered straight to your inbox. And then we also have a YouTube channel where we have segments like Tag Team Tales of Terror. And what that is I wanted to create something different from the podcast I do that was really fun and, creating something different. So Tag Team Tales of Terror is where I invite fellow horror authors to create a short story with me, improv style in 30-second increments based on a prompt I pull out of a hat. And it's been really fun. I've been kind of surprised at how many people are afraid to do it because you'd think, these people, they write horror all the time, but it's kind of, you have to throw plotting out the window. You have to be a pantser when you do this. And I found that it's actually a really good way to unblock you if you're feeling stuck in any creative way.
And this is on the YouTube channel, but I'm looking at, there's a Dread Pop Magazine Substack. There's a Patreon.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And you can check out the YouTube channel regardless of if you're a Patreon member or not.
Okay. Gotcha. Well, so as you mentioned about Tag Team Tales of Terror and how, even seasoned writers are a little intimidated by it because they have to just dive right in being a pantser. What's one lesson you've learned from handing control of a story to someone else?
Like I said, it's a great way to creatively unblock yourself. I mean, you just have to let whatever is in your brain come out. Otherwise, you've got 30 seconds of you staring at each other. So you just have to start talking. And it's really fun to collaborate with somebody else because, everybody has a very different style. And if you're collaborating, you never know where the story is going. I mean, I did one with Mona Kabani and it went in a cosmic horror direction that I was not expecting, but I loved it. And it helps me kind of get out of my comfort zone and in a really fruitful way. And everybody I've had on it so far has said something very similar. Wow, I was scared, but that was fun. And now I feel, like I'm unblocked or that I can write something totally different now.
Well, now I may have your current roles. I may be missing or adding one that you're no longer doing. But what I've got you involved in is epidemiologist, strategist, writer, podcaster, performer. Are those accurate? Am I missing one?
That's
adding
fair.
one? That's fair? Okay.
Yeah, I would also say, though, that I'm a mom to 2 young children.
Oh,
so that's
yes.
my biggest job right now.
Okay, yes. Add that as well. How do you juggle all these creative and professional roles?
Extreme time efficiency. I mean, my kids are 3.5 and 1.5, and I'm kind of the primary on-duty parent. So I am always multitasking. If I can be doing something while everybody's eating lunch, I'm doing that. If I can, listen to an audiobook on a walk, I'm doing that. And when the babies are sleeping, I do my kind of heavy mind work. So writing, podcast interviews, things like that. But really, it's all about priority. I mean, what needs to happen most urgently, that's what gets done. And when my son starts, preschool in August, I'm going to have a whole lot more time, and I'm very excited about it.
Nice. Well, let's leave being a mom out of this one because I'm sure being a mom would be number one. But as far as the other things in your life, is there one that feels most like home to you?
The writing, for sure. I mean, that's the thing that when I can't fall asleep at night, I'm thinking about what I want to write, what story it's going to fit into, frantically typing out notes on my phone. I mean, that's what I'm thinking about the most all the time.
Yeah.
Besides being a mom, of course.
Yeah. Well, like we talked about earlier, you got the idea for the rotting room from historical data, basically. So how did you come across that? Like, my question is, where do you often get story ideas? And in that particular case, how did you come about that information to begin with?
Well, I kind of just take in any information or stories from people that I hear. And if it strikes me as strange or weird or with a slight twist that could be horrifying, I go for it. In the case of the Rotting Room, I found that on Atlas Obscura, which is kind of a collection of hidden history, weird places, things like that. I've found quite a few story ideas from there, actually, just because so many of the things they highlight are scary or could be scary with a slight twist. I wrote one book that hasn't come out yet about a true story that happened to my husband, a fictionalized version about a scary solo hike he took in the Appalachian Mountains. So it's kind of, if somebody tells me something, I might just put it in a book.
Be careful, folks. Have you ever done that to somebody that's aggravated you, made them an antagonist or?
Yes. But they didn't know
snap.
it.
What's that?
They didn't know it, though.
Oh, okay. A lot of people wondering now. Well, kind of piggybacking off that question, what advice would you give to writers or creatives who are trying to merge multiple passions or career paths into a coherent identity?
I would say, this is what I do because I have right now a lot of restrictions on my time, is I just follow whatever passion is loudest at the moment. And there have been months when I don't write anything new, but I pursue something else. I once spent 2 months building a miniature scene from my book, A Cold Night for Alligators, in like a diorama form because it just felt like a fun thing to do. And it was. And, it kind of nourished my soul in a different way and got me out of the writing sphere so that when I came back to it, I felt much more creative. And I found that if you're trying to force it and it's not happening, you might get 500 words you're just going to edit out later rather than waiting for when you really feel like you're into it and you can get 2,500 great words,
Mm-hmm. Well, you often explore horror through unconventional lenses, healthcare, humor, and the grotesque. How do you define your personal brand of horror?
Well, as my podcast is called, it's Horror, Humor, Hunger. That's kind of my brand. And I would say what that is I like smart horror. I don't really know how to describe that, but it's horror with a line level focus on really good writing and something that veers away from the unexpected. So when I am plotting or scaffolding or thinking about my story, I try to think about what people would expect, and then I try and do the opposite. I like having twists. I like having some sort of true element to it, whether that's, like the Rotting Room, that was a real place, or a story that was true, or a place that was real, or, a news story that really happened. So I like to have things that have a grain of truth to them. I think when you ground things in reality, it's easier for people to accept the unreality, whatever that might be.
Okay, so I've been taking notes. I've got literary, clever, historical elements. We got to come up with a catchy term that encompasses all that for your brand.
That's a challenge. It's a challenge.
I'll get back to you on that.
Okay, perfect.
Well, what is the life of Viggy Parr Hampton like outside of writing? And I've lost track of all the other things, the things we've mentioned.
Right. Well, again, I'm a mom to 2 kids under 4. But besides that, I love to take long walks with my dog. His name is Tater Tot. He is a giant German Shepherd Poodle mix. I like to play pickleball. I play in a league once a week. I paint, and I love to play games, board games, card games, any kind of game. And I'm really into nature, especially birds. I'm a bird nerd.
Oh, bird nerd. I dig that. That's And painting, like artistic painting, or?
Yes, oil painting. I do giant oil paintings of classic movie monsters.
Is that one of the harder media, or I don't know what you would call the different types of paint media, whatever? Yeah. Is that one of the more difficult ones? Because it seems like the viscosity would make it kind of hard to deal with.
Depends on who you ask. I find it easier than working with acrylics because you can blend really, really well, and it's much easier to build over time rather than having, you did something and it dries out the next day and then you can't blend. So okay. I find it easier.
Gotcha. Well, Viggy, it has been a pleasure talking with you.
You too. Thank you so much for having me on.
Absolutely. So as we bring the show to a close, is there anything you'd like to plug or let your readers and listeners know about?
Sure. So you can find me at my website, viggyhampton.com. I'm most active on Instagram, but I also have a TikTok, both under @Viggy Parr Hampton. You can get my books wherever books are sold, ebook and paperback. And then if you want a hardcover of The Rotting Room, I do have that available exclusively on Amazon. And I'm not telling a lot of people this, but if you want signed copies, you can contact me directly on Instagram and I can set you up with a signed copy.
Nice. All right. Well, listeners at home, all links are in the description. And Viggy, thank you again for joining me.
Thank you so much.
And thank you to everyone who tuned in. If you enjoyed today's episode, please be sure to like, share, and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Be sure to tune in next Tuesday for a new episode featuring the best and brightest authors and filmmakers of dark literature and film. So until then, stay healthy, stay sane, and as always, thank you for listening. See you next time.